So hello everyone. I'm back here today with you, and of course, in conversation today with me is Gautam Kumra, the head of McKinsey in India. That's his official title, but for me, he's a dear friend, somebody who I've known for a very, very long period of time, and also someone who I very, very, very often turn to for advice. And Gautam has this amazing optic of multiple industries, and he's able to have conversations, meaningful conversations with partners, and I'd like to believe I'm a client for him, but also a friend. So Gautam, welcome. Thank you for joining me in this chat today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Umang, and wonderful. It's a pity we can't do it in person, but nevertheless, I think we're all getting used to this format. Looking forward to it.
Super, very good. Gautam, let's start with the Uber picture, right? Lots of people talking about the economy, a lot of people, and you're probably closest to this, Gautam, and we'd love to hear your viewpoint on just what's happening with the economy. Where do you think we're headed? And then maybe into, we can just move into some industries and which are the ones which have taken the biggest hit and etc. during the lockdown. So, Gautam, what do you think of this?
Look, I think the impact, Umang, a lot has been said, but the impact, at least on the Indian economy, I think has been profound. I think we have all seen, in the first quarter with a 24% decline, I think we were literally the worst performing major economy in the world. And I think it is now a consensus that India will probably have somewhere between 9 to 11% reduction this year. That's dramatic. Just think about a country that, by the way, has grown at 6.8% for 2 decades. And even, frankly, since our independence, we have never been in the negative zone. So this is the first time in the history of independent India that we are faced with a negative GDP growth. And the implications are dramatic, Umang. I think just to give you a sense, if we have to keep all people employed in the country over the next 10 years, for example, we need to have almost 8.5% economic growth. So imagine minus 10 in the context of this country needs to keep people employed. So it's a massive, massive impact on multiple counts.
So it's interesting, Gautam. One of the things that we realized in pharma and healthcare when we were going through the lockdown is just the vulnerability of the industry with respect to a footprint, right? A footprint of people who we had to keep employed, right? A footprint of factories, a footprint, of the whole supply chain. And the latest trend is an antithesis to that, which is automation, right? A lot of people are now up on this whole automation thing. And I happened to attend virtually, of course, Tesla's battery day yesterday. And it was amazing because, Elon's vision for the battery day was just to talk about how sustainability is important for the planet. And therefore, the batteries that drive the electric cars and that will eventually generate power are the most important things. So what do you sense, Gautam? And you have this dual challenge of economy and jobs, and you have this other thing, the opportunity that's coming up in terms of automation. And I know there's a lot of thinking that's happened within McKinsey with books like The Second Machine Age and stuff like that. Where do you think this is going to balance out in the end?
I make 2 observations, Umang. I think firstly, contrary to what most people believe, I think productivity and employment growth have to go hand in hand. If I think about India has to grow at 8.5%, I use as an example, that requires, by the way, employment to grow at about 1.5%, 2%, and productivity to grow at about 6%. So 1.5 plus 6.5 equals 8%. Now, most people find this a bit counterintuitive because they think that if productivity grows and that should result in job losses. Actually, if you look at the history of the world, you look at what happened in China between, say, the late 90s and early part of the century, manufacturing GDP in China grew at 16%. Which was 2% employment growth and 14% productivity growth, right? And you've seen the same, by the way, you live in the US. If you look at the US retail sector, same happened there. What happens is when productivity grows like that, you see that resulting in better incomes, that creates more demand, and that actually creates demand for jobs. So you might see some lag, right? So that's the first observation. Second is, of course, automation will have profound impact, right? Globally, in fact, we sense that 2/3 of the jobs will get automated to roughly 30% or so. So when you look at the movie, it's going to have dramatic impact. But I think it's a question of how the world and companies respond, right? Through reskilling and frankly, I do believe that it's not all bad news. I do think that actually that will have the same kind of productivity impact that we've seen in the last 2 decades.
And I'd agree with that, Gautam. I think we're seeing the same trend within our industry, and a trend where productivity and employment go hand in hand. I think there's a little bit of a yin yang there, and
yes.
people have tried to look at it as one versus the other, but I think they really go together. And one has to find that secret sauce to move to create jobs as well as trying to make them a lot more productive.
By the way, if you look at the automotive sector, I was thinking, Umang, I know the sector that's actually in massive distress at this time. But you look at what companies like Maruti Suzuki and others did when they came into India, right? You look at the 2000 to 2010 period. Some of the large players like that, they created a whole ecosystem. They drove productivity in the sector, that drove employment. So I think we have to get over this thing. I think productivity is good.
Absolutely, I agree, and I think this is pretty much becoming the mantra, Gautam, across the thing. We've seen it as well that productivity is a super important glue for organization sustainability and success. But I want to ask you, Gautam, from your optic, how do you think industries are pairing up on this? Obviously, auto you mentioned was the worst hit. Travel is another industry that's hit really hard. What do you think is happening there? What kind of structural shifts are you seeing in the economy, across industries?
I think, Umang, at least we are seeing two things happening. One is there is polarization happening across sectors. So I think if you look at the movie and you look at it in terms of either market capitalization or economic profit, what you're finding is that there's a greater skew as this crisis is unfolding. There is a bigger skew across sectors. So what you find, for example, on one extreme, and thank God you guys, the pharma sector is actually on the right side of the curve. By the way, technology is another one. You look at companies like Infosys and TCS, they're having their, frankly, all-time highs like you're having in pharma. So I actually think that sectors that have been less exposed to only the domestic market and frankly where the, pharma is a unique one because I think everyone that is resilient to crisis or not. But I think we're seeing one set of sectors like IT, telecom, and pharma that are actually, frankly, in some ways getting momentum because of the crisis. On the other side, I think the usual suspects, we've seen it, but I think I would point out auto on top of some of the usual suspects around travel, logistics, and so on that are facing distress. The other thing, Umang, is also the polarization across companies in the same sector. That's also increasing. So, and I think it's a cause of concern because some people are worried that it's a few companies that are actually hogging majority of the economic profit, and is that good or bad? But we are seeing that.
But so if we come back to some of the industries in India, which are a lot more fragmented, Gautam, do you think this is eventually a shakeout, a consolidation, sort of an inflection point for a lot of companies?
Well, two things I would say at the macro level, Umang. I think one of the things, our sense, if I take slightly longer lens, India needs 3 times the number of large firms for it to achieve its potential. And today we have about 600 companies in India, more than $500 million in size. Right, for India to grow at 8.5%, our sense is you need about 2,000 such companies. Wow. The problem in India is that we don't have enough of these large firms because we actually have a missing middle problem in India. In fact, surprisingly, I don't know if you know this, but if you look at all the companies between $50 million to $500 million in size, India has less than half of what it needs.
Yeah.
When you benchmark that. So I think what you actually need to do is you need to encourage entrepreneurs to become mid-size and mid-size companies to become large. So that has to be, frankly, if you ask me, like China, a bit of a national agenda. Having said that, sector by sector, the story is going to be different. Some are extremely fragmented, and I think they will get consolidated now because there is going to be a flight towards quality, and talent will also fly to safer pastures. I think others are already quite consolidated. Look at the telecom industry; there's not much more room left. I think you have a 2.5 years. So I think it varies sector.
Pretty much across the world too, Gautam. I think telecom is consolidated very strongly across the world as well.
That is true. I think India was an untenable position, as you know. I think, but yes, now it is. Now it's more sensible.
So Gautam, let's come to a favorite topic. Reimagine versus execution, right? So a lot of companies, and at least even us, we are spending a lot of our time in reimagining, but at the same time, you've got to keep the shirt on. So there's a huge amount of focus on execution at this time. Do you have any sense of how these ratios are actually operating between the two? Because reimagination is a lot of recreating. And I think a lot of reimagination is happening around business model innovation at this point in time. But do you sense that there is a change in the balance? For example, pre-COVID, I would like to think people had this reimagination thing, but it was over a longer time period. And now we're really drinking at the end of a hose pipe, including in pharma, where we're trying to reimagine while we're trying to solidly execute. You have any advice, Gautam, for people, industries that are planning to do that?
You see, particularly in pharma, I think among you have the privilege, right? Because I think unlike if you're in logistics, some people are forced with their back against the wall. I think they have to imagine if you were an offline retail player today, I mean, unless you go online, you have no business, right? So some people are forced to reimagine because they have no future to continue the way they've been competing. I think in pharma industry, to some extent, I think it's a choice because you have the privilege, industry has the momentum, but I think you, as somebody told me, you should change most when you don't need to, right? Because then you have real
Well
choices,
said.
right? So
Very well said.
then you have real choices. So and I think pharma industry has the potential to reimagine massively. Look at operations, for example, pharma industry historically has been bottom quartile. You know that. You and I often talked about benchmarking. Automotive is top quartile, pharma is bottom quartile. So pharma has had the need to reimagine operations for a long time. And maybe this crisis is forcing it because you can't, you have to run at 40% manpower, you have to be contactless, contact-free, supply chain resilience, and all of that is forcing the pharma companies to reimagine. I think on the front end, look at what's happening with all the digital ecosystems.
Yeah.
So much value. Right? So I think it'll be a wasted opportunity if pharma companies don't find a way to participate there.
I'd agree. And I think at least within Cipla, we're trying to push this envelope on reimagination quite significantly. And one of the things, Gautam, that I've found is that the patient ecosystem, the end user ecosystem, as you would, whether it's patients or doctors in our case and consumers in the other industries, I think that's going through a very fundamental change.
Absolutely.
Right. And the question is really about relevance. If you don't really innovate and transform your business model, you, as I keep saying, you would be Amazoned, right, at some point or the other.
And I think the key among what is interestingly not clear is that who's going to really take that cake away. You have a real competition going on between, if you will, the pharma companies, you've got the hospitals venturing into that space, you've got the Amazon and the Googles of the world, you've got, frankly, the distributors who want to extend now beyond distribution and B2B to B2C and so forth. So what I think is interesting is that there's a dance going on, right?
Yeah.
And I think everyone is eyeing the same pie. But I think that is where the holy grail is. And I think my impression is that ultimately, when the dust settles down, I think you're going to have 2 or 3 major players in each one of these ecosystems. Health will be a big one, right? So there will be 2, 3 mega players, and then I think there will be perhaps others that affiliate with them. But I think Cipla has a wonderful opportunity given the brand recall and the position you've cultivated over decades. I actually think, I hope, the company finds some way to participate in that ecosystem.
Yeah. And Gautam, in terms of just the overall industrial environment, what do you think are lessons that China or an ecosystem like China had for innovation, an ecosystem they had for business model innovation? What can rub off on India from that? Because I certainly think that, remember you just started by saying there is a missing middle in India, right? But in China, some of these domestic firms have really done remarkably well, right? I mean, they've become huge. They're almost competing at the level of US companies now. So how does one, inculcate that thing? Do you have any input there, Gautam, on what we could be doing better?
I think there are many implications among, I think there are multiple levels, right? One is you have to create the right enabling environment, right? So look at even infrastructure. Because China, I think to me, the first learning from China is that you have to make the economic objective as the paramount objective, even more than social objective. For example, there's a lot of debate in India about inequality and so on. But frankly, unless the economy grows, nothing else will matter. So I think capital objectives, the way China said, infrastructure investment, and that's the need of the hour because that has ripple effect on productivity and competitiveness. You'll be surprised, Umang, if you look at power tariffs, India commercial power tariffs are amongst the highest in the world. It's the only country where commercial tariffs subsidize residential tariffs. Look at land prices. India has amongst the highest land prices. So if you have high land price, high power costs, and labor issues, you're never going to be competitive.
Yeah,
if you're not competitive, you can't create the surplus, then how are you going to invest in innovation? So I think it's very fundamental. I think China has always had this also national objective to build global champions. You look at the top 9, 8 tech companies in the world. I think they're all US or Chinese. There's not a single Indian one.
That's true. That is very true.
And we have to think about, do we want it to be that way? Is that sustainable? Is that acceptable?